I've been doing the Jimquisition for several years now, and in all that time I've managed to avoid the old, tired, never to be resolved debate concerning the length of a video game and how long a video game should be. But The Order 1886 came out this past week, and everybody's talking about it, and in general, boiling a game's value down to its length is not something that's ever struck me as particularly useful. It seems to make great headlines and gamers clearly have big controversial discussions about it, but for me, I'd much rather know if the game is actually good rather than fulfill some arbitrary length requirement. The way I look at it is, a game that's excellent but only lasts 6 hours is going to be better than a game that's shit for 20 of them. Who wants to play 20 hours of something that's really boring, glitchy, or otherwise lacks entertainment? Sure, it takes a long time to play, but when that time is spent having a bad time, it's got no value whatsoever. Rather than how many hours does a game take to beat, I'd rather ask how many of those hours are actually, you know, enjoyable. How well paced is it? How does it feel to control? How's the story? Story is an important factor if we're talking narrative campaigns. Many game stories have natural stopping points, and I would respect a game more if it knew when that point was, rather than drag the game on beyond when it should have concluded. A lot of lengthier games have that problem. I'd much rather have a shorter experience like Dishonored, which tells the story it wants to tell and concludes when it should, than a Dying Light which just drags on and on with comparatively little to say for itself. A game that outstays its welcome just isn't going to impress me. As with many things, it's not how much time you have, it's what you do with the time. We've become obsessed over length, and the obsession is kinda silly. The recent furor over The Order highlights the issue, as ironically all this focus on length has meant the game's actual problems barely get talked about. It's not length that scuppers The Order, it's that even over 5 hours it does very little of note with itself. Its story is just a prologue, a setup for a sequel that doesn't have anything meaningful in it until just before the credits roll. Its combat is solid and satisfying, yes, but the pacing is ruined by hacking minigames and QTEs and endless doors that won't open until the prompt appears. The Order has a ton of issues with its flow and its cliffhanger conga line, issues that could have been tightened up and reduced to produce an amazing 5-hour game. But length is all we're chatting about, ignoring the real conversations about game design that should have been inspired by this prime example of missed potential, because we're too obsessed with how long it is. But of course, length does play a part. It's very easy for the game pundits of the world to profess their love for shorter games and write off the length debate completely. I've done it myself. We critics are, of course, playing dozens upon dozens of games throughout the year. Often we receive codes as part of our jobs, or at least we could justifiably write the purchases off on our taxes. The average customer, meanwhile, is expected to drop 60 bones per new major release and has come to expect a certain amount of dollar to hour value for that not inconsiderable cash. To the average buyer, you've got an Elder Scrolls game on the shelf promising days of content and a linear corridor shooter offering less than a quarter of one day. A value judgment will, in all probability, come into play there. It's just hard to avoid it in a market where games cost the same but offer wildly different running times. And look, your 4 or 5 hour game may have cost the same to make as an Elder Scrolls or a Grand Theft Auto. It may look better and have an engine built from scratch. The budget may have been huge, but, and I've got to be frank, it's simply not the customer's job to give a single fuck about any of that. The customer's role in the market is to find the best deal for the customer, and if a game is offering more in that customer's eyes for the same price, sorry, you gotta live with them going with the better deal. Whether or not length should be so important, the stone-cold intractable fact is that to gamers, it is very important. I get asked length of games all the time while reviewing. I get gamers who tell me they have the budget for one game, and then they ask my help choosing one that will give them the most time for their cash. The recent uproar with The Order has demonstrated that time does equal money to many people. Regardless of your philosophy, it's something a game dev does have to consider. Ready at Dawn justified its running time ahead of launch, saying it stood for diversity in games and used its single-player 5-hour game as an example of such diversity. I find it funny that for all their talk of innovation and diversity, nobody ever thinks of applying that thought process to the price. Well, some people do, actually. A few development heads have said that the rigid $60 pricing structure needs to go. They always follow it up with a caveat though. They always say their game is one of the exceptional ones that should stay priced at $60. Games should have varied price ranges. Not our game though, we deserve our premium. And who can blame them, really? Nobody wants to be the first in their field to charge less for their AAA video game. So we're in this stalemate, where games want the freedom to be flexible in the amount of hours they provide, but will absolutely not budge on the price tag. Games should be diverse! Not their MSRP though, $60 please, homogeny pays! Whee. I've been calling for a more flexible tiered pricing system for years now. The default $60 price can be lethal to certain games, and I wince when I think of many failed titles that might have been successes if they had launched at 40 or 30 or even $20. Imagine, two games come out at the same time. They're both $60. Someone who wants both is expected to drop $120 to get them, plus taxes. Many of them will just choose one because $120 for games is fucking unreasonable. This refusal to budge on price shoots games in the foot at launch being the most important time for a game, and is likely the reason why huge price drops end up happening so soon afterwards, and why used games are still a big deal. Yes, I get it. Games are expensive to make and you want to make that cash back. But are you going to do that charging $60 for Enslaved? Apparently not, because it's sold like dog shit. For $60, it's clear what people want. They want hours and hours of content. Is that right? Is that wrong? Doesn't matter, that's the state of play. But what do they want for 40 or 30 or 20? We barely know, because nobody wants to lower themselves to that tier. It's seen as the realm of budget and little digital games that AAA titles should be above, even if they're offering a single 5-hour campaign. I mean, Grow Home is about as long as The Order, and it costs $7.99, and it's worth every fucking penny. If you want to be flexible in the amount of content you offer, you should be just as flexible in the amount of money you demand. For the sake of your own business, you know? You want diversity? Diversify the budgets and the price tags in AAA development. Don't just pay the D-word lip service. So that's where I'm at. To focus on game length to the exclusion of everything else, removing context, ignoring quality, narrative, reasoning, pacing, and overall justification, does a disservice to games as an art form and insults them by rendering them down to little more than soulless toys, bland morsels meant to fill us up and nothing more. However, discounting length entirely is no more noble a practice, as it wipes a sizable concern of the audiences under the rug and allows developers to not really think about what they're truly offering their customers for a hefty price tag. A tag that should, overall, be way more fucking negotiable than it is, rather than sticking to one price because that's how it's always been done, even as gamers feel less comfortable about dropping 60 doubloons on yet another corridor shooter with hacking minigames and a threadbare story. Brilliant. I'm dedicated to making the Jimquisition the most valuable product I can. You know, people on Patreon pay kindly to keep this show going, so I want to make sure you get the most bang for your buck, which means I'm dedicated to making this week's episode as long as possible. Value, dear children. So this just keeps going until I'm satisfied that it's long enough for you, because the Jimquisition is always designed to be long enough to satisfy. Yeah, that'll do. Thank God for me.